Hi, my name is Frank Schaefer, and I come from a background of religious conservatism that I left, but that has given me a perspective on my life and the life of my country that I would call taking unintended consequences seriously. I don't see myself as a writer or a commentator first. I see myself first as a human being, as a father of 3 grown children, a grandfather of 5 grandchildren, that I provide childcare for, at least the younger 3 still, who live nearby. And my contact with the other parents at the school where I pick those kids up is one of the great pleasures and privileges of my life. Because as a 71-year-old looking back with regret at the unintended consequences in my own life, such as the part I played in the 1970s and 80s as one of the religious rights leaders, along with my father, I was his nepotistic sidekick. I'm very aware that what we do has consequences. Often harm is done. And those of us who claim any sense of moral personal responsibility then try to undo that harm. This may seem like a stretch, but to me, it's a logical next step, and that is, in looking at some of the issues of the day, such as artificial intelligence and all the talk about AI, it strikes me that people like Elon Musk, who talk about AI being a risk in the future, do so in far-fetched, far-flung science fiction terms, not surprising for a man who wants to put us on Mars so that we have a chance of human survival and all sorts of other ideas. But when I look at AI, what I see first and foremost is the insensitivity of the tech community toward the needs of real people. Instead of talking about science fiction and the idea that maybe AI will lead to our tech overlords ruining the earth with a kind of a Terminator-like scenario of tech gone wild, maybe we should look closer to home and start with the ruined lives right now of teenage girls in high school, where AI is being used to fake pictures of them combined with nude photography, making it look as if they're posting nude photographs of themselves. This is a really big deal, and we can't just brush over it. Doesn't it strike you as ironic that the first real victims of AI, whose lives are actually being ruined right now, is not in some futuristic Terminator scenario imagined by an Elon Musk or other tech bros, but teenage girls, the same people who have suffered at the hands of Mark Zuckerberg and the other tech bro giants, who have put greed and lack of control of their product and places like Facebook and others ahead of what is actually good for today's teenagers. A whole generation has been put in jeopardy by our smartphones. A whole generation has been put in jeopardy by so-called social media that is anything but social, has been designed deliberately by the tech bros, the tech giants, to be addictive, to keep people in the algorithmic loop that you can never escape. And now on top of that, you have high school girls exposed to what I'll call the worst aspects of the sexual revolution that opened an unthinking door to porn becoming sex education, to putting everything online, to the consequences of separating sex itself from affection and love, and looking at it as an isolated item apart from human experience. Where does all this come together once again? Well, it isn't in some far-flung, tech gone berserk, Terminator science fiction future. It's right now in young women being targeted. And of course, it would be young women, wouldn't it? Let's not pretend that we're living in a culture that if you did come from an alien society and looked at objectively, you would conclude it hates, in this order of sequence, young women, young mothers, young families, in that order. No social services for young families, childcare out of reach for most people, a stupid workism culture that puts career and education ahead of parenting in terms of the jobs so-called people want, given the assistance they get from corporations, which is never to have a family, but always just to give your life and your energy to the bottom line and to profit. And into that mix, the tech bros have dumped unthinkingly, unthinking about unintended consequence, all these networks, and now an ability through fake photography combined with AI technology to destroy the life of a high school girl somewhere right now as I speak, with no consequences whatsoever. We've had hearings in Congress. We've had a president in Biden who's tried to do something about this, but always addressing a future threat. Well, what about high school young women right now whose lives are being ruined? Where do they get their lives back? You know, I may be an idealist, but I think the power of the courts is still real. And I would like somebody to come along and sue Google and the other big tech companies for $1 trillion, the kind of suit that closes a company for the harm done to one young woman somewhere, where the technology they have developed and allowed people to tap into unthinkingly is used to destroy a life. Maybe that's vengeful of me, but at some point, we are going to have to worry more about our tech overlords and what they are doing to us than some futuristic Terminator scenario. It's not going to be the Terminator we have to worry about. It's going to have to be the sleazy individuals like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and the others who have unleashed on us for profit a shitstorm, if I can use that expression, of unintended consequence that they never address in the here and now. What's happening to young women right now? What's happening to teenagers right now? What's happening to the values of a culture where social media has driven us apart and not brought us together because they have designed their algorithms directly to be addictive to teenagers, where parents are battling to get their kids to do homework instead of staring at an iPhone, where ordinary young women, 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds, are having to worry about so-called pranksters that are actually indulging in what I believe is criminal activity and character assassination. And their boomer parents, speaking of myself, and grandparents, enabled through the sexual revolution by disconnecting the idea of sexuality from love, from romantic attachment, from beauty, and making it into an isolated subject as if somehow sex can exist outside of a framework of relationship as an isolated fact. That's the problem, by the way. It wasn't disconnecting sex from procreation that was a problem. Thank God for contraceptives. But the idea of sexuality existing in a vacuum as if it is somehow isolated from life comes home to roost in so many ways in ruined lives and our ruined concepts of sexuality and affection. And here's a new one, and that is nudity and porn, giggle, 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 no big deal. Why are we getting exercised about this? And all of a sudden, a 14-year-old somewhere in Nebraska or upstate New York or California wakes up one morning and there are nude and pornographic, realistic pictures of her all over the internet, posted there by some boy in her class or some other person or some pedophile without consequence. The real criminal here, aside from the teenager who ought to have his life ruined as a consequence of doing this, the boy who does this is a criminal and should have his life ruined. But aside from that is the tech companies that have to be called to account. And instead of listening to them blather on about AI's threat in some Terminator future, how about AI and Google and all the rest of their threat to ordinary young women? Let's start there. Women whose body image has already been attacked and ruined by these same prankster tech bros, this misogynistic cult of technology that has excluded women often from the process itself where the profits can be made, but preys on young women's body image, preys on young women's sensibility with all these ridiculous influencers and all the rest of it. And now we turn the page, and the first real AI calamity, and I say this again as a 70-year-old white male, privileged, sitting here in my studio, able to blather on myself in this commentary on my Substack channel, on my It Has to Be Said channel, through my podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, this ability to blather on unmolested, this privileged position where in a traffic stop, I'm not taken out and tasered or shot by a white cop, this privileged position, but nevertheless, can I put in a plug for the rights of young women to live free of the damage done to them by the ridiculous tech bros and their greed, who have never changed the algorithms in favor of teenagers, who have never done anything about the unintended consequences of the sexual revolution pouring into the brains of 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds across this country, ruining sexuality for them, turning out a generation of the worst lovers the world will have ever seen, whose idea of sex is separated from affection and commitment and love in ways that has never plagued the human race before. Yes, you know, porn has always been with us. And by the way, I am not anti-porn. I am not anti-erotica, but I am anti-porn and erotica as an 11-year-old sex ed. I am anti-nude pictures and pornographic films being combined through AI with the picture of a young high school girl who is just trying to study and whose aim is to become an astrophysicist someday, and now she has to deal with this shit. Shame on the tech industry. Shame on Google. Shame on every search engine that makes this possible. I'm sorry, but you are disgusting people. The tech industry has fed young women in particular, and teenagers and young people in general, into the maw of their bottomless greed and stupidity of unintended consequences. And let's just stop for a minute and think what it is like for the young women to wake up and be pranked in this way. This is not funny. Young men who do this should be tried as adults and put away as sexual predators for years, and may their lives be ruined as an example. Their families should pay the price. This is an assault. Yes, this is violence. This is sexual assault. And it should be treated as sexual assault. And young men who do this should be part of the criminal justice system and have their lives ruined until it is something no one does because the price is too high. And the tech bros who make this possible should be hounded out of civil society and should be named and should be sued. Enough is enough with these tech companies and the lives they have ruined. Let's strike a blow for the right of a young woman to grow up unmolested and unattacked by the tech industry. Speaking as a father and grandfather, but as a human being, I am outraged by what's happening to young women in this country. Am I the only person who feels this way? I don't think so. And if you agree with me, let your voice be heard. My name is Frank Schaeffer.